Welcome back to AgriTalk on this Thursday. Joining us now, Davis, we have Kip Eideberg, Senior VP of Government and Industry Relations for the Association for Equipment Manufacturers, or AEM. Kip, welcome to the program today.
Hey, thanks for having me on time.
Yeah, we want to get into the president's speech last night and some of the impacts and the reaction from his speech last night. But real quick, Kip, before we do that, we just talked to Nick Beck about the shortage of some of the supplies that we're seeing, and he's having some problems with seed tenders. And I know equipment manufacturers, your members are dealing with extremely phenomenal demand right now at a time when some supplies are kind of tight.
No, that's right. We are still feeling the effects of the havoc that COVID-19 wreaked on the both domestic and international supply chains, and that's parts and components that are needed to make the equipment that our industry builds. But we're also struggling, and this is related time with the astronomical cost of steel. It is through the roof. And it is making us as an industry a lot less competitive compared to, let's say, equipment made in Europe or in China. So it's a real problem right now, and we hope to address it. We've been talking with the Biden-Harris administration, with congressional leaders about it. We're working on some solutions, hopefully. But right now, the good news is that demand is through the roof, but we're struggling to meet that demand, just like you said.
Kip, those added expenses kind of filter down through the entire supply chain, though. From if the manufacturer's paying more for their inputs, then that makes an end product more expensive to the end user. And to me, all this, as I'm sort of keeping count of all of the similar situations across the ag equipment industry, I think this is going to take a while to unravel too. And I wouldn't even ask you to put a time frame on it, just simply to confirm with you. Am I correct in thinking this is going to take an awful long time for prices to come down, if they ever do?
I think you're partially correct. I mean, we are optimistic that we can try to do something about the challenges that we're facing on the supply chain side rather. And I do think that as we get closer towards the end of the year, some of the global supply chains in particular will start to stabilize. And so that will allow more parts and components to come in, and that will help address some of the the price challenges. I'll say we're also, our member companies are working with their customers to make sure that this increased cost is spread evenly out. But to us right now, the cost of steel is the biggest issue, and I think as a country, I'm all for manufacturing, all kinds of manufacturing, but if we have to pick between making a lump of steel or an excavator or a tractor, I think that calculation is pretty easy to make, and I think we have to make a decision, at some point as a country, what is it that we want to focus on?
Right. That's a good thought.
Yeah, and Kip, I'm hearing even semiconductors. I mean, when you look at that issue that your members are dealing with right now, I'm hearing possibly 12 to 18 months to work through some of those shortages. Is that accurate?
Yeah, on the semiconductor side, that is accurate. Now, no, obviously not all the equipment that our members make require them, but increasingly, they do, and that is something that the Biden-Harris administration is looking at. Obviously, they've got a number of working groups and task forces that they've stood up. It has the attention of congressional leaders, both in the House and the Senate, but there's not going to be a short-term solution to it. We have allowed foreign competitors to own that segment, and so what we got to do is we got to look more broadly, long term. How could we make sure that we can make all of the critical inputs that go into whether it's equipment or other products in the United States, and if we can't, how do we make sure that the supply chains can hold up under the stress of something like a COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, and Kip, when you look at the American Families Plan that we saw the president talk about last night in his joint address to Congress, we're hearing some mixed reaction, definitely hearing some positive, but at the same time, the president talked about all these jobs that would be created by this plan. But we're at a time right now, Kip, where it sounds like there's a lot of jobs, especially in manufacturing, that we do not have the workers to fill those jobs at this point.
I think that's a great point, Tyne. And I think it is clear that the president is focused on strengthening U.S. manufacturing, like you said, and we want to work with him to make that happen. But I think, as it relates to his joint address or last evening, we wish you'd focus a little bit more on the specifics. You know, you talked about workforce and some of the challenges there. How do we train and retain a 21st century workforce? How do we ensure that the United States is the premier place in the world for research and development? That goes to the semiconductor issue. And how do we do all of this while at the same time preserving the predictability and the stability in the tax code that keep businesses competitive and drive job creation and good wages? And I'm not sure they have figured that out yet. You know, there's a very ambitious agenda, a lot of good ideas, some maybe not so good, but we've got to see the specifics. And then, of course, they got to get to work, and they got to figure out a way to work with Democrats and Republicans to turn this agenda into common sense legislation that can pass both chambers with bipartisan support.
How severe is this labor issue today for your members? Is it coming to a point where they may have to close shifts? They may have to shut down for a bit just because they cannot find enough workers? Is it to that point yet, Kip?
Hey, we're not there yet, thankfully. But looking ahead, the next 5 to 10 years, we are going to have a shortage of up to 2.5 million manufacturing workers. That's across the manufacturing sector if we do not do something to address and close the skills gap. So, we're figuring out ways in the meantime. There are some real good solutions out there. One, for example, is to extend Pell Grant eligibility to technical and career colleges to make sure that those young men and women who want to pursue a career in manufacturing, that they have the same type of financial support as someone who's pursuing a 4-year, degree at a liberal arts college. That's just one idea, and we got to keep working at it. It's got to be a partnership between the industry, between government and between the educational community.
Yeah, Kip, I saw this week there was a signing day for technicians. I think it was a John Deere dealership that tweeted that out, where they had a signing day to celebrate some of these high school seniors that decided to go into their technician program, and really kind of like a college signing day for college athletes. As you bring more attention and we celebrate some of these folks that are deciding not to maybe go into 4-year university, maybe to go to some of these technical degrees, what else can Washington be doing? You mentioned some of it, but what else can Washington be doing to put the focus back on those essential jobs that we just don't have enough workers for today?
Well, I think there's lots of things they can do. One thing, and I think this isn't just Washington, it starts with all of us, right? That is to recognize that you can have a great career in manufacturing. In our industry, for example, the average salary is 35% above the national average. And, many of our manufacturing facilities, our members' manufacturing facilities, they are in small communities across the country where, the cost of living isn't nearly what it is in some of the urban areas. And so these wages are family-sustaining wages. You can have a great life, raise a family, and have some money left over for retirement. So we got to start talking about that. But I think another related point is broadband. And bear with me here as I explain this. Going back to last night's address, the president did stress the need to connect every American with high-speed internet, including 35% of rural Americans who still do not have it. And if I'm making equipment, tractors, excavators, you name it, in a rural community, I want to attract top talent, or I just want to attract anyone who wants to come and work for me. If I cannot offer reliable broadband to them at home, maybe so that they can, access telehealth, teleeducation, they're not going to want to live in those parts of the country. So we've got to fix the broadband. We've got to close that connectivity gap as well as part of doing everything else we've talked about. But broadband is critical to this.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the plan that the president kind of outlined yesterday, and that it is missing some details, but you also called it ambitious. I mean, Kip, realistically, is it too ambitious?
Well, that's the million-dollar question in Washington right now, Tyne. And I think the answer is probably yes when it comes to certain aspects of it. So let's take infrastructure, for example. Out of the $2.25 trillion in the American Jobs Plan, about $1.3 trillion is earmarked for hard infrastructure assets, roads and bridges, waterways, locks and dams, airports, et cetera, broadband as well. I think we can all agree that we ought to invest in those kinds of infrastructure assets. We have to rebuild and modernize our infrastructure if we're going to keep our competitive advantage over other parts of the world, China, Europe, et cetera. And I think there it's just about getting to a solution about how to pay for it. And I think Republicans and Democrats can get there. The problem is you look at the remaining part of it, and that's where a lot of disagreement is, and that's probably where it is too ambitious. And so, we are excited that there is an actual substantive, serious debate about infrastructure right now in Washington. Not the old jokes about Infrastructure Week. But at the same time, I think maybe they've gone a little too big in scope. And so I wish that they would sort of maybe cut it up into chunks and focus on each individual portion. And I think they'll be more successful in terms of getting it passed with bipartisan support, which is critical time.
Kip, real quick, we know that some of the tax code is beneficial to equipment manufacturers as it incentivizes farmers and ranchers to buy equipment. Are there anything big in the possible changes to the tax code that really you guys are waving the flag about right now?
In terms of would be beneficial, or in terms of would not be beneficial?
Both.
Yeah, well, in terms of what would not help us, obviously, is if you increase the statutory corporate tax rate, that's not going to make us more competitive, as a nation, and that's going to have a negative impact not just on manufacturers but on customers. There's some other provisions that they want to tinker with as relates to international taxation. That's not going to help us. Now, there are some good provisions about making R&D more affordable. And, to us, R&D is the lifeblood of our industry. So that is a good one. And we'll just have to see time. But, at the end of the day, let's make America the premier place for manufacturers. If we can do that, we will all be better off.
Amen. Thanks, Kip, with AEM.